My name is Elena Brooks. I just turned 18 years old. At my birthday party last night, my Daniel Brooks pulled me into the hallway. He spoke in a low voice like he didn't want anyone else to hear. When this party is over, he said, you're going to sign some papers for Michael Brooks. It's just a formality. I smiled. I nodded. I said okay. Then I walked into the kitchen. I opened my laptop. And I moved my entire inheritance from my grandparents into a locked, unbreakable trust. Just in case. The next morning my parents and my little sister found out the truth. The cabin. The savings. The investments. Everything was protected behind a legal wall they could not touch. Not now. Not ever. My Daniel Brooks went pale. My Michael Brooks, who had already signed a deal to sell property he never owned, picked up his phone and called a lawyer. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back. Back 6 years to the summer everything started. I was 12 years old. My grandfather picked me up in his old truck and drove me to Cedar Lake. The cabin sat behind tall pine trees right beside the water. The porch leaned a little to one side. The screen door never closed all the way. The whole place smelled like wood smoke and old books and something sweet I could never quite name. Grab the other end, Grandpa said, lifting a fence rail. I grabbed it. We spent the whole morning fixing rotten fence posts together. Grandpa never rushed me. He showed me how to press my thumb into the wood to test if it was soft and weak. If the wood gives in, he said, it's done. Time to replace it. Inside, my grandmother, Margaret Brooks, had sandwiches and iced tea waiting on the kitchen table Grandpa had built with his own hands. That evening we sat on the porch and watched the lake turn gold. This cabin stays in the family, Grandpa told me quietly. Then he looked at me in a way I never forgot. But family isn't always blood, Elena. Family is whoever shows up. I was 12. I thought he was just being poetic. I had no idea he meant every single word. After that summer I spent almost every weekend at Cedar Lake. Grandpa taught me how to fix leaky pipes and check the roof for damage. Grandma taught me how to organize the bookshelves by color because it made the room feel warmer. Slowly they were showing me every part of that cabin like they were handing me pieces of a secret. But back home in our house in Ridgemont things felt different. Our house was fine. Not warm. Just fine. My younger sister, Emma Brooks, had the bigger bedroom with soft lavender walls and expensive furniture. My room still had the old carpet from the family who lived there before us. One night at dinner, Daniel Brooks brought up the cabin. He was cutting into his steak, not even looking up. Dad's place is losing value, he said. We should sell it and reinvest the money. Catherine Brooks nodded without looking up either. Makes sense to me. Grandpa said the cabin stays in the family, I said quietly. Daniel Brooks laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was worse than that. It was a laugh that dismissed me completely. You were 12, Elena. He was just being nice to a kid. Then the conversation moved on to Emma's debate trophy. Nobody asked me about the science fair I had won 2 weeks earlier. After dinner I noticed a shiny flyer sitting on the kitchen counter. Ridgeline Development. Lakefront lots. Premium prices. Someone had written a phone number on the side in pen. I stared at that flyer for a long time. Someone was already looking at my grandparents' home and seeing dollar signs. 2 years later, when I was 14, Grandpa Thomas died. At the funeral, I saw Daniel Brooks and Michael Brooks standing near the dessert table. Michael had a folder tucked under his arm. We should move on this before probate gets complicated, he whispered to Daniel Brooks. They were talking about selling the cabin. At Grandpa's funeral. I stayed quiet. I was only 14. I had no idea Grandpa had already prepared for this exact moment, years in advance. 2 more years passed. Grandma Margaret Brooks got sick in March. She died in June. The last time I visited her in the hospital, she held my hand so tightly it almost hurt. The cabin is yours, Elena, she whispered. Don't let them take it. I promise, I told her. She squeezed my hand one more time and closed her eyes. After her funeral, Daniel Brooks sat at the kitchen table looking almost relieved. Now we can finally sort out the property, he said. That night I heard him talking to Michael Brooks out in the garage. Let's get this moving, Daniel Brooks said. I stood in the hallway holding a glass of water, and suddenly I understood something terrible. Grandma's death felt like a huge loss to me, but to them it felt like an opportunity. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I made a decision. From the time I turned 16 until I turned 18, The cabin became my quiet rebellion. Every single Saturday I drove out to Cedar Lake in the old Honda I bought with babysitting money. I fixed torn window screens. I swept pine needles off the roof. I replaced worn-out weather stripping around the doors. Back at home the way people talked started to change too. The cabin stopped being Grandpa's place. Now it was the family property. Michael Brooks started visiting more often. Sometimes he brought folders. Sometimes he brought real estate papers. One night I finally spoke up at dinner. "Grandma wanted me to keep it," I said. Catherine Brooks gently set down her fork. "Your grandma was very emotional near the end." "This is business," Daniel Brooks added. "Just business." That word business became their answer for everything. By the time I was 17, Daniel Brooks got even more direct. "When you turn 18 we'll settle this as a family," he said. But the way he said the word family made my stomach twist into a knot. One afternoon at the cabin, I found an envelope hidden behind a stack of old quilts in the closet. My name was written on the front in careful handwriting. Inside was a business card. Rebecca Harrison, attorney at law. And underneath her name for small words, Brooks Family Trust. My hand started shaking. Grandma had hidden this here for me to find. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Rebecca called me directly. "I need to speak with you before your birthday," she said carefully. That Saturday I met her downtown. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. She opened a thick folder and looked straight at me. "Your grandparents created an irrevocable trust 6 years ago," she said. "The cabin, the savings, and the investments were all placed inside it. The total value is around $2.1 million. I just stared at her. "You are the sole beneficiary," she continued. The whole room felt like it tilted sideways. "The cabin was transferred into the trust years ago," she said. "Your Daniel Brooks and your Michael Brooks have no legal claim to it at all." "Why didn't they tell my Daniel Brooks?" I asked. Rebecca paused for a long moment. "Your grandfather told me something very clear. He said his sons would sell that cabin before the funeral flowers even wilted." Then she added something even worse. "Someone has recently been asking questions about the title." After that meeting I started paying much closer attention to everything happening around me. One Sunday Michael Brooks came over for dinner. Afterward he and Daniel Brooks walked into the garage together. I stood near the cracked door and listened. "I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgeline," Michael Brooks said. $450,000. My chest tightened. "How do we clean up the title?" Daniel Brooks asked. "We file a quit claim deed," Michael Brooks replied. "Mom and Dad are gone. We're the legal heirs now." "What about Elena?" "She's 17. She can't stop anything." Then Michael Brooks laughed. "We'll give her 50 grand for college. She should be grateful." I stepped back from the door with cold, shaking hands. Michael Brooks had already promised to sell a cabin that he did not own. That night I texted Rebecca. "They're moving faster now." Her reply came almost instantly. "I expected that." The next Saturday Rebecca explained the full plan to me. "The moment you turn 18, you legally become the successor beneficiary," she said. "Once you sign the paperwork, I'll file a legal notice at the county office first thing in the morning. After that, nobody will be able to sell the property. What if they try anyway?" "They'll fail," she said simply. I looked down at the stack of papers in my hands. Should I tell my parents? Rebecca slowly took off her glasses. "Your grandfather asked me to protect you, not to negotiate with them." 9 days before my birthday, Daniel Brooks announced he was throwing me a big party. "You only turn 18 once," he said with a wide smile. I smiled back. But inside I knew the whole truth. My Daniel Brooks was planning my birthday party. My Michael Brooks was planning to steal my cabin. And I was quietly waiting for both of them to walk straight into a trap that my grandparents had built years before either of them even suspected it existed. 5 days before my birthday, Catherine Brooks sat beside me on the couch. "Now that you're almost 18, she began softly, "we should make some family decisions together." Together. That word felt fake in her mouth. "The cabin costs money," she continued. "Taxes, repairs, insurance. If we sell it, we can pay off some debts and it can help both you and Emma." "Grandma wanted me to keep it," I said. Her patience slipped just for a second. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Elena." Daniel Brooks walked in at exactly the wrong moment, looking proud of himself. I already talked to a buyer, he said. What company? Ridgeline, something like that. I already knew. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Daniel Brooks smiled wide. That's my girl. Later that night, Emma crept into my room. Mom and Dad keep talking about the cabin when they think I'm asleep, she whispered. They sound excited. Is something happening? I tucked the blanket around her feet. Don't worry about it, I told her. But she still looked worried, and honestly so was I. 3 days before my birthday, Michael Brooks stopped me in the driveway. He smiled like a salesman closing a deal. The land alone is worth $450,000, he said. You say yes and you walk away with $50,000 cash. His smile tightened just slightly. You're young, Elena. $50,000 is a lot of money. Whose name is actually on the deed? Your grandparents. But they're gone now. That's not how ownership works, Michael Brooks. For 1 second his expression flickered. Then he smiled again, quick and smooth. Don't overthink this. As soon as he drove away he called someone. I already knew exactly who. The night before my birthday I drove to the cabin alone. The lake was dark and completely silent. I sat in Grandpa's old porch chair and opened Rebecca's email on my phone. All the legal papers were ready. Everything was waiting just for my signature. At midnight I read through every single page twice. Then I closed my laptop and just listened to the water. Grandpa once told me that patience wasn't weakness. It's timing, he said. Sitting there in the dark I finally understood exactly what he meant. The tears came quietly. Not because I was weak. Because I wished things were different. I wished my Daniel Brooks cared more about fishing trips than property values. I wished my Catherine Brooks had simply asked me what I wanted. I wished I didn't need a lawyer and a stack of legal documents to protect myself from my own family. But wishes do not win legal fights. Documents do. I drove home and set my alarm for 11:45 p.m. At midnight I would officially turn 18. At midnight everything would change. At 11:50 p.m. the house was completely silent. I joined a video call with Rebecca. Ready? She asked. Ready. The clock struck midnight. I signed the acceptance papers. Just like that I officially became the legal beneficiary of the Brooks Family Trust. Rebecca explained the next step. At 8 a.m. I'll file a legal notice with the county office. Once it's recorded, nobody on earth can sell this property. I looked down at the signed page in my hands. This isn't a trick, Rebecca said gently. This is your grandparents' final gift to you. Downstairs my family slept peacefully with absolutely no idea that Michael Brooks's fake paperwork was already completely worthless. That same night, Michael Brooks had printed forged documents at his apartment. He called Daniel Brooks around 11:30. Everything's ready, he said. We file first thing tomorrow morning. Daniel Brooks sounded nervous. You're sure this actually works? Simple transfer between heirs, Michael Brooks said confidently. But it was not simple at all. Michael Brooks had already signed a contract with Ridgeline Development. If he failed to provide real ownership papers he would owe them $45,000 in penalties. He had bet everything on a property he never actually checked properly. And by morning he was going to learn the truth the hard way. My birthday party started at 4 in the afternoon. The living room filled up with neighbors, church friends and relatives. There were balloons, a big cake and silver decorations everywhere. I smiled. I opened gifts. I laughed at the right moments. But inside my jacket pocket was the paper that changed absolutely everything. Daniel Brooks stood near the cake and raised his glass. Elena is officially an adult today, he announced proudly. And our family has some exciting plans for the future. He looked directly at me. Right, Elena? Every face in the room turned toward me. Thanks, Daniel Brooks, I said. I said nothing more. Later, our neighbor Sarah Mitchell, who lived right next to the cabin, quietly pulled me aside. I saw your uncle at the property last week, she whispered. He brought 2 men in suits. They measured the land. She paused. He had already shown the property to buyers before he even owned it. After the cake was served, Daniel Brooks stood up again. Our family has struggled financially, he announced louder now. But Thomas and Margaret left us something valuable. The cabin at Cedar Lake. The room went very quiet. And as a family, he continued, we've decided to sell it. We've decided. Those words hit me like cold lake water. Daniel Brooks smiled at me. Elena understands this is best for everyone. I slowly set down my fork. I never agreed to sell the cabin. Daniel Brooks's smile froze on his face. She's joking. He laughed nervously, glancing around the room. I'm not joking. Michael Brooks stepped forward, his voice tight. This isn't the time for this. I looked at him calmly. You're right. The time is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Silence filled the whole room. Nobody understood what I meant. But Michael Brooks suddenly looked very nervous. Guests started leaving soon after that. Once the house finally emptied out, Catherine Brooks turned toward me furious. Do you have any idea what your Daniel Brooks is going through? She snapped. He could lose this house. And you're trying to sell out Grandma's memory. We are a family, she shouted. And if you really loved this family, you wouldn't need a lawyer. I froze. How do you know about a lawyer? Catherine Brooks didn't answer right away. Then she admitted it. Michael Brooks had gone through my bag and found Rebecca's business card. The room seemed to spin around me. They had gone through my personal things. Before I could even speak, Sarah stepped into the kitchen. That girl has every right to speak with a lawyer, she said firmly. Catherine Brooks glared at her. This is family business. Sarah did not back down 1 inch. Margaret would want Elena protected. After Sarah left, Daniel Brooks closed the kitchen door. Suddenly the house felt very small. Here's what's going to happen, Daniel Brooks said slowly. Tomorrow morning we file the paperwork. The cabin sells. You get $50,000. Out of how much? Nobody answered that. And if I refuse? Daniel Brooks's face hardened completely. Then you're on your own. No help with college. No living under this roof. Those words hurt more than I expected them to. You're threatening to kick me out? I'm asking you to be part of this family. I stood up slowly. I am part of this family, I said quietly. I'm the part that keeps promises. Then I walked upstairs and closed my door. That night I sat on my bed holding the signed trust papers in my hands. My grandparents had known exactly what would happen. And they had protected me long before I even understood why I needed protecting. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the county recorder's office opened its doors. Rebecca Harrison was the very first person through them. She handed over the trust documents and filed the legal notice against the cabin property. Done. From that exact moment forward, anyone who checked the title would see the truth. The cabin belonged to the trust. And I was the beneficiary. At 8:14 Rebecca called me. It's done, she said. I sat quietly at the kitchen table eating cereal. Daniel Brooks and Michael Brooks came downstairs dressed for business. We'll be back by lunch, Daniel Brooks said, grabbing his keys. I looked up calmly. Good luck. At 9:05, Michael Brooks handed his quitclaim deed to the county clerk. She typed the property number into her computer. Then she stopped. I can't record this document, she said. Michael Brooks blinked. Excuse me. The property is owned by the Brooks Family Irrevocable Trust. It has been for 6 years. Daniel Brooks stepped forward. That's impossible. The title records are very clear, the clerk replied. Then she added the final blow. There's also a legal notice filed this morning. Michael Brooks's face drained of all its color. Daniel Brooks slowly turned to look at him. You said this was simple. I didn't know about any trust. You're a real estate agent, Daniel Brooks shouted. How did you not check? Rebecca sat quietly in the waiting area watching the entire scene unfold. She never said a single word. He didn't need to. At 9:22, Daniel Brooks called me. What did you do? He demanded. I accepted what Grandma and Grandpa left for me. You went behind our backs with some lawyer. Daniel Brooks, I said softly. The lawyer has been involved for 6 years. You just never asked. Heavy silence filled the phone line. This was my parents' property, he whispered. And they chose me to protect it. Another long silence stretched between us. Not because they didn't love you, I said carefully. Because they didn't trust you with it. Daniel Brooks hung up. A few minutes later, Ridgeline Development called me directly. Their lawyer sounded frustrated. We have a signed contract from Michael Brooks. He doesn't own the property, I replied. There was a long pause. Then the lawyer asked quietly, Is the cabin for sale? No. That same afternoon, Rebecca called me again with worse news. The notary stamp on Michael Brooks's paperwork appears to be fake, she said. My stomach dropped. That's illegal, isn't it? Yes. My Michael Brooks hadn't just tried to steal the cabin. He had committed an actual crime. Daniel Brooks came home around 2 in the afternoon, looking completely exhausted. Catherine Brooks had clearly been crying. Daniel Brooks sat across from me at the table. The bank is after me for $180,000, he admitted quietly. The store is gone. The cabin was supposed to save us. I'm sorry about the business, I said honestly. But the cabin was never yours to sell. Catherine Brooks stepped forward. Your grandparents weren't thinking clearly near the end. They created the trust 6 years before they died, I replied. Daniel Brooks slammed his hand on the table. I'll contest the trust. Then Rebecca's voice came through my phone speaker. I had already called her. Mr. Brooks, she said calmly, fighting this trust will cost you far more than the property itself. The trust is airtight. Daniel Brooks stared at me, and for the very first time in my life I saw something different in his eyes. Not anger. Defeat. 2 hours later, Michael Brooks called the house. Ridgeline was suing him for damages. His voice shook. They're accusing me of fraud. Daniel Brooks's answer was cold. Did you commit fraud? I thought we owned it. You're a real estate agent, Michael Brooks. You never checked. Silence. Then Michael Brooks admitted something terrible. I found a notary stamp somewhere. I used it. Daniel Brooks inhaled sharply. That's forgery. I need a lawyer, Michael Brooks whispered. So do I, Daniel Brooks replied before hanging up the phone. Over the following weeks, everything fell apart. Ridgeline sued Michael Brooks. The county opened an investigation into the fake notary stamp. Michael Brooks's real estate license was suspended. People around town started talking not because I spread the story but because court records are public. Soon everyone knew what happened. Thomas Brooks's sons tried to sell his cabin. His granddaughter stopped them. Some people called me brave. Others called me cold. I didn't argue with either side. One afternoon, Michael Brooks called me directly. Please, he begged. Ask your lawyer to remove the legal notice. Maybe I can still fix this. The notice stays, I said. Your grandparents would be ashamed of you. I looked over at Grandpa's framed photo sitting on my desk. My grandparents are the reason the trust exists, I answered quietly. They chose this. He hung up. Daniel Brooks eventually stopped fighting altogether. He sold the building supply store at a loss and worked out a payment plan with the bank. Catherine Brooks went back to work at the pharmacy. We managed to keep the house, but just barely. For 2 weeks, Daniel Brooks and I barely spoke a single word to each other. The silence inside our house felt heavy, like it was pressing down on everyone. One evening, Emma called me from a friend's house. I don't understand everything that happened, she said softly. But I'm sorry they hurt you. My throat tightened. Thanks, Emma. In late April, I drove back to the cabin. The trees beside the lake were finally blooming. I unlocked the front door with the key Grandpa had given me years before. The cabin smelled exactly the same as always. Pine, old books, sun-warmed wood. I walked slowly through every single room. The kitchen table Grandpa built with his own hands. Grandma's colorful bookshelves. The porch where we used to watch the sunsets together. Then I found another envelope tucked inside a desk drawer. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter. He wrote that he loved his sons, but they never understood the difference between something that has a price and something that has value. Then came the line that finally broke me completely. I chose you, he wrote, because you asked if the roof needed fixing before you ever asked what the place was worth. At the very bottom he had written one last thing. Take care of it. It took care of you first. I sat on that porch for a very long time after reading those words. A week later, Rebecca called again. The legal notice can now be removed, she said. The title is fully secure. And Michael Brooks? He settled with Ridgeline by taking out a personal loan. The deal is completely dead. Then she added one more thing. Your grandparents also created a separate college fund for you. $50,000. With interest, it's now over $58,000. I closed my eyes. $50,000. The exact same amount Daniel Brooks and Michael Brooks had tried to use to buy my silence. My grandparents had already planned everything quietly, carefully, with love, long before any of this ever happened. That week, I enrolled at Ridgemont Community College, studying environmental science with a minor in forestry. The cabin was only 20 minutes away. For the first time in my life, I wrote the cabin's address under home address on the enrollment form. And for the first time it finally felt true. A few days later, I asked Catherine Brooks and Daniel Brooks to meet me at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. Not the house. Not the cabin. Somewhere calm. They looked nervous when they walked in. After we sat down, I spoke first. I love both of you, I said quietly. But the cabin is not for sale. Not now. Not ever. Catherine Brooks opened her mouth to argue. I stopped her gently. You threatened to throw me out. You searched through my bag. You tried to pressure me into giving away something Grandma trusted me to protect. Daniel Brooks stared down into his coffee cup. Finally, he whispered, I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it today, I said. Then I stood up. I'll call you Sunday. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. One Sunday in May, Emma came out to the cabin carrying a pizza box. We sat together on the porch watching the lake. I didn't know about any of it, she said quietly. I know. Was I part of the problem? I looked at my little sister. She hadn't asked for any of this. You were a kid, Emma. We both were. She looked out at the water. It's beautiful here. Grandma used to say that every time she sat on this porch. Emma smiled softly. Can I come back sometimes? Anytime. We spent the afternoon talking about school, the old dock, and a heron near the shore. For the first time in a long while, everything felt peaceful again. Early one morning in June, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of coffee. Mist floated above Cedar Lake. The trees stood dark against the rising sun. I thought about everything that had happened. I didn't really win against my family. There is no victory in being hurt by people who were supposed to protect you. But I kept my promise. And for the first time in my life, I stood somewhere that truly belonged to me. Not because I fought harder than everyone else. Because two people loved me enough to prepare for the future, long before I even saw the storm coming. My grandparents couldn't stop my Daniel Brooks from becoming desperate. They couldn't stop Michael Brooks from chasing after money. But they could make absolutely sure I had solid ground beneath my feet. I looked out at the lake turning blue in the morning light. Grandpa was right all along. There is a difference between something that has a price and something that has real value. And my family spent years focused on the wrong one. If you are listening to this and you ever feel like nobody is protecting you, remember something important. Sometimes the people who love you prepare for you quietly. Sometimes they build shelter long before the storm ever arrives. And sometimes all you have to do is keep the promise they trusted you with. That's my story. If it made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it.